We sound pretty good, Christine.
I know. I should have also said, I am a mother too. My job started this morning, trying to get everybody out the door, and it happens to be picture day and raining and all that nonsense. But I'm proud to also be a mother, a parent to two small little boys.
And I'm glad to know I was not alone in the struggle this morning to get everybody out and off to school. Well, welcome, Christine. We're so glad to have you. You told me the other day that this is your first appearance at one of these in-person conferences in about 4 years.
I mean, humans,
yeah.
Responding back,
maybe some
not
of
on
you
a
can
screen,
relate.
is so energizing for me. I love it.
I love it too, and I wonder in that vein, how important is this kind of face-to-face interaction to the day-to-day operations at Welch's right now?
It's so powerful. Yesterday we spent all day doing our sales growth plan, and we had about 30 people, all different levels, in the room talking about what we wanted to do and focus on for the next 3 years. And we wouldn't have been able to do that as effectively in a hybrid environment with people on the screen. There were so many of those water cooler conversations. There were so many opportunities for us in break to really validate or get consensus or alignment on things we wanted to move fast on. So, we're a CPG company. I'm not software as a service. I'm not in the financial sector. We're actually making products. We have to be there to test it, to see it, to make it happen. So we're having different challenges ourselves, but it's so important for us to be back in the office in some sort of capacity.
Well, that is a key distinction, right? If you were a software company, you could just say, okay, we're all hybrid or we're all remote. Or if you were a bakery, I suppose, everybody would have to be there making the bread and the muffins. Your company is in the position that probably many of yours are, with some kind of a mixed force. As Jay said, you have farmers and you have white-collar office workers, and so the in-office or in-person requirements may be different depending on the role. So how do you handle that and make everybody feel like they're being treated fairly?
Yeah, well, making everybody happy 100% of the time is impossible. As HR professionals in this room, I'm sure you can say that sometimes it is a struggle. I think equity is so important, and taking the time to really listen, engage with those associates. Don't forget, I have a huge industrial athlete workforce. Those are our union people in our plants. And it's so important for us as leaders to get out there and have face time and recognition. I saw some amazing companies out here that are doing some fantastic things in that space, and it's so important for us to show gratitude and appreciation because of those certain workers that aren't able to get off the line. They actually have to be on the line day in and day out, making sure, especially now for us, it's harvest. So we have a huge pull at this point of the year for the next 3 months, which is pushing really hard for a lot of people. And it's so important. Next week I'll be out in the plants and the farms, which is my favorite part of the job, by the way, really seeing our crops be brought to life and be manufactured. So for all the enjoyment in this room, and our jellies, our jams, our fruit snacks. I've heard from some people they love our fruit snacks too. So
they're in the lunch boxes of my kids, I think. Yeah. Well, so if in this busy time then, how or do you scale up or scale down personnel? We've seen a lot of companies right now in this labor market thinking, do we use more contractors because we don't want to make that commitment, but we need to be flexible? How are you handling that?
We're also responding to the market of the employees we're pulling from. I think we're all facing challenges that there's more of a gig economy now than ever, and there's not necessarily people that want to work 12 months out of the year. There's some people that have special skills that work for 8 months, then take the summer off, or work, high volume times. We definitely rely on, just from a business sense perspective, of bringing in seasonal workers. Just because from a volume perspective, the way our plants are situated, we have to manufacture those grapes within 8 hours within our plant. And that's the freshness you taste in our bold flavor. But without that, and without that, ability to adapt and bring people in that gig economy, we would be struggling for sure.
You're good enough to be joining us while you're still quite new in the job. I think today is day 90, is that
90
right?
days,
Day 90
yes,
days,
90
all right.
days.
So congratulations on the 3-month mark. I wonder if you'd step back and tell us a little bit about the path that led you to Welch's, because you have a rare combination of credentials, Christine. I don't know anybody else with a poli-sci degree from Villanova and a certificate to drive a forklift.
Yes. It's been a wild ride on the HR train, I would say. I've yet to meet somebody who's coming out of school that's I definitely want to be an HR professional. It's exactly what I want to be. I know I want to be that. And that certainly wasn't me. I started in the workforce at a great time. The economy was collapsing around us. And I fell into it because I had a passion for nonprofits. I had a passion for helping, and I happened to get hooked up with a company called Schneider Electric. And so for almost 15 years, I moved more or less 7 times. I was an HR practitioner where nobody else wanted to be, which was manufacturing at the time. especially in the Northeast. If you'll remember, we were moving lots of plants and manufacturing down south or even in Mexico, or offshoring or nearshoring. There's a lot of that happening, and I constantly raised my hand to do those things. So that's how I ended up in China for 3 years doing productivity. And building our Go West strategy. And it gives me such appreciation for being an immigrant in somebody else's environment. You imagine, like, at the time I was like 28 or 29, like blonde hair, walking into plants and like Chengdu or Xi'an and saying like, hi, I'm here to help you get more productive in China. Like, the credibility was so low at the beginning. And so I had to really prove myself and ask a lot of questions and get a deeper appreciation how work gets done in other cultures. I mean, 1/3 of our economy goes down during Chinese New Year. There's so many things that I was learning about how people work and how they work differently in dorms and things like that, that these were other HR things I never had to worry about as an American, but now I was facing these challenges very remote with not a lot of support. From like Americans, and so I had to stretch myself, and so that started my journey to most recently living in France during COVID, which sounds a lot more romantic than it was during that time because it was COVID. But it was also amazing to then get germane and understand our work councils and our strategies with unions in Europe, which is a huge challenge. I'm sure there's a lot of international HR professionals here that are always going to bat with trying to understand what's going on in those markets. But Welch has really brought me back to having a purpose, which was so important. We happened to, I say, accidentally buy a farm when we moved back to Boston. If you'll remember, there was like no houses, no cars. It was so impossible to buy a house a couple years ago. And we ended up buying a watercress farm on several acres, and it's been the most amazing transformation for my kids. As parents, we're struggling with screen time and trying to redirect them all the time to really having the ability to learn and problem solve. And so living on a farm every day, even this morning, chickens and getting them up, getting them out there to really get their hands dirty has been so important. So when Welch's came knocking, I had no idea what a cooperative was, like absolutely no idea. I didn't even know the Associated Press was a cooperative. I'm not sure if many people know that. But understanding that this company that I'm working for is owned by 700 farming families. It's not owned by an oligarch or, Wall Street. I'm in service of Main Street, which is a huge challenge and a great opportunity. And so when I think about all the dollars I spend in my budget or the talent I'm bringing in, it's for meaningful, purposeful work. I sit at the dinner tables of these farmers, and I have for the last several months, just getting to know them and seeing 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generation farmers passing these things down to their families is just so powerful. And it gives me like that fire, that energy to want to do my best every day. And I can say that that's really reflected in our engagement as a company. So that's kind of summarizing a little bit to where I am today.
What comes through in that personal narrative, though, is this desire to get out of your office and onto the front line to learn more about what your workforce is doing, whether it's learning to drive that forklift or buying a farm. And I wonder what the takeaway then might be for other business leaders, because one thing that drives rank and file workers crazy when I speak to them in my day job is when they feel like their boss doesn't even understand what they do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's a perfect case of why I learned how to drive a forklift. We were having so many issues with retaining and attracting talent and getting them to understand the test, because you have to take a test for PIT. Everybody knows that. It's been in an OSHA environment. And we were struggling all the time with our recruiters to try to understand how to bring people in quickly. And I was like, let's get on them. Let's just learn what's required to do this and see what the challenges are. Let's go in on a Saturday. Let's go in on a Sunday afternoon. Let's start getting out there and seeing what's really happening, like the pain points of transitioning from one shift to another. Let's observe how it happens and help them kind of work through what we need to do from a communications perspective. So that wasn't part of any job description I've ever had, and I think that that's what counts when you're really doing those listening tours and those focus groups, and they're talking about like the bathrooms, like we want updated bathrooms, and you want different selections in the cafeteria. It's like, for us, it's such like a mundane thing, but for them, this is where they've been spending most of their working career for 20, 30, 40 years in many cases when I meet these workers. And for them to say somebody from an executive level is listening and taking action, and not only taking action quickly and circling back and getting to know their name personally, it really counts for something. And I think that's so important for us to not lose sight of the bigger things that are happening in the corporate environment, what's really important to those that are going day in and carrying the backs of a lot of our companies.
You mentioned the cooperative business model. Around here, if other folks may be familiar with Cabot Creamery, or maybe it's Ocean Spray Cranberries.
Exactly.
Do you compare notes with peers that have similar, or do you plan to? I know you're still early.
Yeah, I'm still early, but I am. And the cooperative community has been actually phenomenal here. They've all, connected or reached out to me, and Land O'Lakes has reached out to. So it's been really humbling, and we're all facing the same challenges, which is we don't have these big corporate budgets. We're working with farmer dollars. Everything I do is in service of farmer returns. So you really have to have a strong business case for why you're going to implement a new system or a tool, because that's revenue coming out of the farmers' pockets, which I think is also great. You constantly think, my money, my company, my money, my company. But at the same time, you're also challenged with saying, like, I want to attract talent that's going to work at 1.5 half times, that's going to light the world on fire. So for me, it's about comparing notes, but also comparing what's worked well in this type of environment where you have to make these business cases. And so that helps set up, because I also have not one board, I have 2 boards. I have a corporate board, which is fantastic. We have a lot of professionalized individuals from, ex-CEO of New Balance and ex-CEO of Post Cereal, and it's been fantastic to work with that. And then I have a board full of farmers that I also have to present to. So anything I'm doing, I have to make a really strong ROI, which I've seen a lot of fantastic vendors out here actually printing that out and saying, this is what we're going to give you here. And I think that's so important from the value prop that we do. And it is a community when it comes to a cooperative, because at the end of the day, like I said, we're not answering to Wall Street, we're answering to Main Street. So these farmers in these communities invest these dollars back to these flyover states and these small towns and these rural communities, and that counts.
What do you then see when you talk to your peers, and you've been in HR at several companies for a while now? What is the broad scale state of talent acquisition and retention, and especially when it comes to some of the big DEI promises that companies made a few years ago? There were some very ambitious goals. How about a progress report a few years in?
Yeah, I'm going to take a deep breath. I would say, it's funny, I called 2 CHROs on my way in this morning just to catch up, and I think the talent shortage is still very real. I think we've been super slow to adapt. And I say this for me and my former companies, and where we need to continue to aggressively change the mindset of hiring managers on skills-based hiring more, lowering requirements more, investing in learning and development more. And DE&I, I would be remiss to say anybody's like, yeah, we're done. It's done. We're complete. We feel like we've met all of our KPIs and we're moving on. I think everybody's very much still in that journey that I speak to, and maybe even revisiting what KPIs work for them today that maybe didn't work several years ago, because there's just gaps in talent, and you cannot find that talent if it's not being developed. I mean, if you're not getting women in STEM from middle school, you're certainly not going to get them in high school to take those AP bio classes, and you're certainly not going to get them graduating with chemistry degrees or biology degrees or engineering degrees. So for me, it's still this cultural movement that we need to see shift, and we certainly play a role of it as employers and reinvesting, but I would love to see, and this is my pipe dream, but more investment in technical schools. I'm new to Boston, I haven't been here that long, but I live in the Norfolk, we actually live very close together, but there used to be tech schools that would train you in these skills deficits all over the place. I mean, and now it's relegated to something that's from the distant future, and I think we're all feeling it. You want to get something done around your house right now? It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible.
Yeah, good luck finding a contractor. My wife, by the way, is a proud graduate of Tri-County Regional Vocational High School in Franklin.
That's what I couldn't remember that.
Exactly. We have some around here, but you're right, they're sort of dwindling in that education. can go hand in hand with a term that you mentioned a moment ago, which is that skill-based hiring. I want to drill down on that because it can go hand in hand with the DEI goals that you were talking about. But this is the notion that you don't necessarily need the classic credentials to do a job, like a college degree perhaps, if you can demonstrate that you have the requisite skills. I wonder how that plays out at your company and whether it helps build a positive work culture where people feel like, hey, there are opportunities for me to advance.
I think that's a great question because I really think it starts with understanding who your hiring managers are and if they're trained to hire correctly. And I mean correctly, like to suss out not just behavioral interviewing, but also like what are the cultural differences in your company from a values or behaviors perspective that you need to suss out very quickly. And so I've used this method, shout out to GH Smart, the Who hiring method has helped me tremendously from really understanding who people are and the repetition of understanding, what has their previous experience been? And it doesn't need to line up with exactly what we're looking for from a career perspective. We need to be challenged to be taking bold bets. And to me, that happens very quickly when I have those conversations with the hiring managers to say, like, your position's been open for 120 days. What we're doing right now is not working. We need to take a time out, revisit our approach to this position, and really sit and think about what you truly need, good, better, best, and really start looking at the candidate market. Because if you want somebody in the Boston area that's gonna be in the office you're starting to really close that pool down. So we need to get very creative, and I think that's for some managers, and that counts from an HR perspective. We need to get better at training them on what to look for and what good looks like for our companies, our specific companies, whatever behaviors and values that they may align to.
And when it comes to building that company culture, you talk about who. I guess there are two ways to look at that. There's who are we as a company, and do we find people who match that, and who are you as a candidate? How do you make sure that those things align? It can be very hard, no matter how much you vet somebody, how many rounds of interviews you do, until somebody's really there, it can be hard to tell. So how do you make it work as best you can?
The best I can is we've done and moved to a scorecarding model, which is you really look at the core competencies, the values, and what is required from the job. And I tend to build a scorecard for my really critical roles because it can be labor intensive. And then we look at what we're trying to do to match those people in each of those scores, A, B, and C. And again, that's back to the Who hiring method. That really helps us understand, what are we able to coach? What are we able to kind of understand that this is going to be a growth area or development area? Or what do we understand that we're going to accept this candidate may not change in that area? We're hiring full-blown adults in some areas that have already materialized into certain behaviors that, I'm sorry, we're not all psychology degreed individuals here. We may not be able to coach out to the best of our abilities. So there has to be that acceptable threshold, and that manager is going to commit to working on some of those gaps very quickly in the onboarding process so that you can set that candidate up for success. And I think onboarding continues to be also the greatest opportunity that we have as a company at Welch's, to making sure people feel that meaningful, purposeful, we're working for farmers right off the bat, day one, and really understand who our customers are. And we do a lot of taking them through the grocery store and really feeling who we are from a pulse perspective. We call it, our path to grapeness, if you will. And it really resonates with our candidates. We've gotten some really positive feedback recently. And making sure they also get out to the plants and see where the magic happens, I think, is so important. So we really push that early and frequently.
For a lot of leaders, one of the challenges that they run into and air to me is trying to give their employees a sense of ownership. They want them to feel invested in their job. I suspect that might be a little bit easier in certain ways with your cooperative farmers. They literally own the company. But what is the translation there for businesses that have a fundamentally different model? I can imagine being at a different model of company and saying, how do I give my workers or my workforce that same sense of ownership when they don't actually own a share of the company?
Yeah, I think it gets back to meaningful, purposeful work. Even if you're in the financial sector, you're helping people retire. You're helping people get smart about managing their money. I was manufacturing appliances. To me, it was prior to that, it was saving mom and dad time so that they could focus and really have those moments with their children and creating value for the consumer. And so you have to really sit down, I think, every couple of years and say, like, are we of service of this mission? Are we of service of the values and the behaviors that support that and attribute to our success? I think it's so important that the leadership team is aligned and you're pulsing the employees. I mean, they're going to tell you really quickly on the employee engagement surveys. I'm sure most of us are doing that. I mean, really quickly if there's a misalignment. And you're going to see that in pockets of the organization. And I think it's so incredibly important to make sure those continue to row in the same direction, and you work from that teamwork mentality, not family. Even though I'm a family-owned company, we're not a family in that sense. We're still a team, and I think that's really important to set those expectations early and frequently.
That's well put. Christine Kinahan, Chief People Officer at Welch's. We'll have to leave it there. Great job. I'm going to steal your joke, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
And we look forward to doing this again soon.
Thanks, Callum. Thank you. Thanks.